of and know all of the tools in our toolkit before we get into the deeper process of figuring out the values we want to establish and the process through which we actually go through figuring out how do we do boundaries. So we're suggesting that the first series of meetings between now and May is covering the whole system analysis of where we are, how we got here, and what does the potential outlook look like between now and the next 15 years, and how do we best plan for the system going forward. After that is we'll get a presentation from John Isaacs and Wendy Willis, who are going to talk to us about the big growth values and equity survey that's going to be launched by the district next month, and how D-BRAC will hopefully be playing a part in that process to develop what some of the questions are for that survey, and how that survey could help inform how D-BRAC does its work over the course of the next 6 months and going forward. So trying to figure out aligning that process of community engagement with how we do our work simultaneously. And then from that, it's just going to be doing a series of next steps to figure out where we're going on from there. So that's the process overview for this evening. Additionally, in your member packet is kind of our two additional documents. One is the memorandum that I sent to Carol Smith and CC'd all of the members on January 5th, clarifying where we stood on our position back in December in terms of not taking a position at this time on doing short-term relief strategies in terms of boundaries for two of the top tier 1 schools. And so that this memorandum is basically kind of a recap of everything that we summarized. So that was sent out in December for feedback. I didn't get any additional comments. So this is what we put out. So I hope that it is an accurate reflection of what we talked about in December. Mm-hmm. Thank you. And then, so the last component is, again, summary of meeting notes from the meetings we had in December. It's not an official format. It's just a collection of all of the components and discussion points that we had raised over the course of that meeting. And then the last thing really quickly, I wanted to find John, I don't know where he is, to quickly talk about some issues. John?
Some issues. I wanted to just give you an explanation for the camera. This is Dan Green from the PBS AV team from our educational media. So as you all know, the subcommittee you created to recommend your operating guidelines included in those guidelines a recommendation that the recording be allowed, but only by PBS media services. And I know you've not approved those yet, but in thinking about how to make this committee the most transparent possible, anticipation of you adopting those guidelines, if you choose to do so without editing them, or that you might make amendments or whatever, I felt the right thing to do was to begin recording this meeting. And if you adopt those guidelines the way that they are currently written, and we begin recording and posting meetings online so members of the public can watch them, we would want to include meetings that come before them. Okay, so if you choose to amend those and go a different direction, then we won't post this meeting. We won't post any meetings until you all adopt those guidelines. But if you do and when you do, that way we're posting all of the meetings that you held this year. Okay?
Thank you. So let's shift into some introductions, but before we plunge into the group introduction, there's a couple of people that are here for the first time. Mm-hmm. So I'll go Director Morton, and then Sheila Martin, and then Director Egan here is our guest tonight. Each of you just introduce yourself to the group. I mean, I'm sure everybody knows who you are, but please introduce yourself for the group.
Hi everyone, Matt Morton, Portland School Board. Good to be here.
I am Sheila Martin, Director of the Population Research Center in Portland State.
And Bobby Regan on the Portland School Board. I'm only here till about 7 p.m. My kid's leaving for college in the morning. We're having dinner, so.
You've got your priorities in the right place.
So what we want to do with the group introductions is, many of you are sitting with different people, which is a good thing, meeting to meeting, getting to know each other a little better. And as you recall from previous meetings, we do sort of a name, organization, but we've tried to have one other question that's a little different or a little interesting, just so that you start to get to know each other a little better. And so the question tonight, since we're focused here at an organization that's dedicated to kids' education, a lot of times it's good for us to remember what it was like to be a child. So the question for tonight that you answer, along with your introduction, in addition to your name and organization, is to briefly state one thing you miss about being a child. So for me, Jim Jacks, Portland State University, I'm your facilitator, and one thing I miss about being a child is being able to read until 3 a.m. every night.
Judy Brennan, Enrollment Director, your lead staff. I miss having somebody there to tell me everything was going to be better when I was afraid it wasn't.
Sasha Perrins, Senior Director of Portland Public Schools. I miss unstructured time.
My name is Michelle Arntz. I am a representative from Portland Council PTA. And I miss being able to play outside all year round. I wasn't here, obviously.
Good evening, everyone. Mike Pichet, Coalition of Communities of Color, and I miss playing hide and seek.
Margaret Calvert, I'm a PAPSA representative and the principal at Jefferson High School Middle College for Advanced Studies. I miss the sense of waking up every day and saying, wow, there's the figuring out what the play is going to be, right? Like, what is it that you're going to pay attention to today that is all about fun?
Michael Reunert, I'm also a PTA representative, and I miss summer vacation.
Jason Trombley, representative from Sackett and D-BRAC co-chair. And I think the one thing I miss about being a kid is that being able to sleep in until noon on the weekends.
Nisha Saxena, I'm a parent in the Grant Cluster. I miss sitting in a corner and reading a book while someone else made dinner.
Scott Bailey, I'm here as a representative of the Superintendent's Advisory Committee on Enrollment and Transfer, also known as Sackett. We're dealing with acronyms here, right? I was just talking about this today, and it started with, why is life so complicated? Yeah, remember when we were like 8?
I'm Sarah Lewins. I'm a PAPSA rep. I'm the principal at Roseway Heights, and so many of what you guys have all said has deep resonance with me. Reading, I don't read more other than what I have to, and I read all the time. I was a prolific reader when I was a kid. I realized when you said that, I missed that.
Kim Wilson, PAT representative and also a parent. I was watching my son this morning. He gets in these, he was reading on the couch, and then all of a sudden something will take him and he will follow it, and pretty soon he was at the table drawing whatever had come into his brain, singing, and I just remember thinking, oh my gosh, I remember doing that, I want to go do this now, and just being able to go do it.
Shannon Foxley, school counselor at Wrigler, and PAT representative and a parent as well. And I think one of the things I miss about being a kid, especially as we've just gone through Christmas, is just the absolute belief in magic, and that it's all real.
It's not.
Sorry.
You're here.
Sheila Martin, director of the Population Research Center, and I miss all 7 of my brothers and sisters in Portland.
I'm Alice Perry, and I guess I've been appointed by the superintendent. I work for Latino Network, and I'm a parent of boys at Franklin. And I guess I must be doing something right or wrong because I still read till 3 in the morning. And I miss playing with dolls. I'm a mother of 4 teenage boys. And
Well, my name is Maxine Fitzpatrick, and I'm the director of Portland Community Reinvestment Initiatives. And what I miss is something that someone has already said, and that's being able to go outside and play all day. Even after it gets cold, I'm not cold, you know, I can just play. I miss that so much. And then I also miss hiding under the covers with the flashlight.
Yep.
I'm Pam Knowles, I'm on the school board. I think what I miss is just the boundless energy of being a kid. And, yeah, that boundless energy and optimism. Total. Everything's always gonna be there. I'm Bobby Regan on the school board. I have 2 sons who graduate from Portland Public Schools. I miss playing outside unsupervised for hours and hours and hours with my 5 sisters.
My name's Tony Magliano. I'm the Chief Operating Officer for Portland Public Schools. I missed summer vacation.
Hector Roche, I'm the Senior Equity Manager for Portland Public Schools. And I grew up in New York when it had 3 Major League Baseball teams. And I miss arguing with my friends about who was better, Willie, Mickey, or the Duke.
Matt Morton, Portland School Board, and you know, I was thinking, I have a 6-year-old son right now, and I am absolutely reliving being a child. The, you know, kind of illegally playing football in the house, or soccer, or any other thing. Those were the things that I really missed growing up, and I'm getting to experience them again.
So, Max, we're name, organization, and one thing you miss about being a child.
I'm Max Tuttle. I'm one of the co-student body presidents at Madison High School. And one of the things I miss most about being a child, which I guess I'm technically not anymore, nap time.
All right, so we'll shift to public comments. If there's anybody else that wants to speak, fill out a yellow card and get it to me. And we're gonna have Dave Porter first. And I've got our 2-minute timer, and Dave's got a handout that I'll pass around, and looks like Tony will help, thank you. So, Dave, take it away.
Excuse my sitting, I don't stand well. I'm Dave Porter, I'm an immersion advocate. I'm going to read the first part of this, and the rest is there for you to read when you have a chance. Let me respond from a dual language immersion advocate perspective to the question, what does a successful boundary system look like? A successful boundary system would permit the ongoing expansion of dual language immersion programs throughout the entire district. It would permit additional new dual language immersion to be added each year towards meeting the following PPS district goals. 1, every emergent bilingual English language learner who would benefit from a dual language immersion program should be in a dual language immersion program. 2, every kindergartner whose parents want their students to attend a dual language immersion program should find a slot in the dual language immersion program. And a further characteristic of the PPS system would be that 3, neighborhood applicants to dual language immersion programs should get admission priority over out-of-neighborhood applicants so that dual language immersion programs are neighborhood friendly. I go on in the rest of it explain that we basically have 2 categories of dual language immersion, those that are for English as a second language, emergent bilinguals, and trying to close the achievement gap for them, and there's some research. And we have ones that are for English-speaking students to make them more speak world languages and to be able to become global citizens. Some of those things blend in different programs in different ways, and some are fair, but they are sort of distinct categories. There is significant research on both that shows that this is the best method for English as a second language students to become successful in school. And on the other hand, this is the best way for English language students to learn a foreign language, and there are other cognitive benefits that come with it. The stuff's in there, the flyer in there, also on why I think dual language immersion programs are better than English only programs.
Thank you. And we'll go with Heather Leak. Do you have anything you want to pass out?
at the plan up through May 21st, and I'm pretty concerned. I'm concerned that there are no hard dates set for decisions, no goals have been set other than a final outcome of boundary lines, no broader discussion of what the educational benefits or any benefits of the boundary lines will be. The discussion of what exists and what current challenges it's moot. We need to set an ultimate goal, then set sub-goals and plans and dates and such, and stick to those plans and dates. And currently, I don't see any dates, and that does not create a path to success. You need to make a list of criteria for the overall process. What kind of programs do we need to have, K-5s versus K-8s? What are the target number of kids for those programs and why? And so on and so forth. There's other list of criteria there. And once those criteria are in place, draw some lines. Doesn't matter where they are, just start somewhere. Next, make a list of triggers. Are the schools under-enrolled? Lack of neighborhood capture rate? Is the building too small for a successful program? Or is the program wrong for this facility? Is there a lack of students due to local kids going to special programs, immersion, focus, etc.? Is the school overcrowded and for the same reasons, capture rate, wrong facility, wrong program? Or does a school nearby have somewhere to put some more kids? We need to be mindful of balanced student populations. In some schools, there's too many kids in the younger grades and not enough in the older, and the older kids suffer because they can't have a full spectrum in program. And we need to be mindful of equity, and equitable programs in middle schools and all high schools, all middle schools. The use of the second set of criteria could be used to grade what schools need to be on the top tier, second tier, and so on and so forth. This process, it's too big to implement all at once. You've got to pick a place to start, and you've got to work with the first schools first, and so on and so forth. I don't think there's any district in the country that could implement this all at once. So I just urge you to really set some hard dates, hard times, and stick with it. Because otherwise this just cannot happen by 16, 17, and that would be a real travesty. So, thank you for your time.
Thank you. And Ted Wolf? Do you have anything you want to say now? Nothing
My name is Ted Wolf. I'm the Vice President of Community and Parents for Public Schools. For the record, I miss building snow forts and then going inside and watching. I offer this comment on behalf of the CPPS Board of Directors. At our general membership meeting last Sunday, members reviewed your work plan for January through May 2015, and we had a lively discussion about the charge to the committee. And we applaud your desire to cultivate a deep understanding of the current state of the enrollment system. However, we could not help but notice that the draft work plan itself is a list of possible topics for discussion over the next 5 months, with no clear connection to the actual task of redrawing boundaries and creating a new framework for boundary adjustment. Our members expressed concern that with this exploratory start, the probability of completing the task in time to introduce the new framework and implement any new boundaries by the start of 2016-17 is approximately 0. We urge you to put forward as soon as possible a plan with a timeline and a set of deliverables to give parents and community members some confidence that implementation can and will be done in a timely fashion. We propose that the district, if it hasn't already done so, develop a plan backwards from a date for school board approval, the new framework and boundary maps, which would probably need to happen by November 2015. The plan will need to include sufficient time for the technical work that must be performed, for public input on the values and factors that should inform that technical work, and for public input on the proposed boundary changes themselves. We seek greater clarity about which issues related to boundary revision should be decided by education professionals, and which issues should be open to influence from parents and community members. We have questions about how D-BRAC's charter relates to the survey work that will be performed by Portland State. We'd like to know who will perform the technical work, and how partners like the City of Portland will be involved. We appreciate your desire to avoid polarizing and paralyzing controversy, but we recall these words from the Center for Public Service. Even the most carefully crafted, patient, and credible process will likely cause significant controversy, especially among parents who believe boundary changes will adversely affect their children's educations. What's needed now is the courage to make decisions. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Wolf. So we will shift to our next agenda item. And I also also wanted to thank Rob Mannion for the Oregon Public Broadcast for being here tonight. And we'll turn it over to Judy for about the next half hour. And Judy, take it away.
Components, but three really critical ones are the people doing the work. You're an important part of the people doing this work, not the only, but a very important part of it. The process, how you get the work done, and then the result of that, or the product. And for the purpose of this discussion tonight, I'm going to ask you to focus on that product. We will have other opportunities to also dive into discussions around the process, the people. And again, I think it's going to be very iterative, and a part of it will be woven through all of our discussions in the coming months. So, I'm going to seed a couple of ideas with you, and then we're gonna have a little bit of discussion. So I've got a handout that's got this information that's going to be presented. Written out, so you have a copy of it, and you can make your own notes on this as we go through it. Make a paper airplane, whatever. Just in case you missed doing that when you were in the shop. Okay, so a couple of statements that have already been made, either at the staff level. The first one came out of a discussion among the superintendent's direct reports of what the purpose of the boundary review process is. So, establish strong, appropriately sized programs through an equitable, inclusive, transparent, and ongoing boundary enrollment balancing process. So this statement covers both the product and the process. Secondly, to equitably manage future enrollment growth. We've highlighted the enrollment growth that's expected and the need to be able to manage for that. And a response to community values and views on program offerings, enrollment, and school configurations. So I just want you to take a look at those for a minute, contemplate them, and as I said, we're going to have a little opportunity for discussion in a minute, but before we get to that, so there's some purpose discussion. The next thing I want to put up, just as some framing information, is this question of what are the characteristics, what are you looking for in a boundary that distinguishes it as a good one versus a not good one? Which ones do you need to change? Which ones do you need to keep as they are? What do you look for? So you may have your own list, and we want to hear about that. But before we do that, there is a list that exists at a policy level now, and hopefully you've all reviewed that. But I thought we'd go through that list over just a few minutes to make sure that you understand it and are comfortable with it. It's a list of factors for consideration. That's the language that's used in policy and in the administrative directive. And it's also listed as a non-prioritized and non-exclusive list. So the list isn't in any particular order. at least in the policy. And it leaves room to say there may be other important factors that aren't on that list. So as we're going through this, I want you to be thinking about a couple of things. First of all, just because it's not prioritized in the policy doesn't mean that you as an individual wouldn't prioritize it. So once you start thinking about your own priorities or what you believe is most important as we look through these factors, as well, think about what's missing. What isn't on the list that you think should be, and that's what the discussion topic is going to be about. So Jim, I'm going to ask for your help, and I didn't ask you before, but this is how big you are. Okay, so I've noted up there on the chart pack different ones, and so I'm going to walk us through, and they're on your list, what these different components are that are laid out in policy now. And I've got a tool for you all to use. Everybody has a set of these cards. Jason and Nisa just flinched because these are a standard operating, and Scott, at SACIT meetings, standard operating procedure, so this takes that. So everybody should have a set of these. And at the end of talking about each one of them, I'm going to ask you to hold up the color of card that best represents your own just top of mind thoughts about that topic. So here's what you would hold up. When I talk about, say, stable feeder patterns, and you look at what that means, and you think, yeah, I think that's an important consideration when you're looking at boundaries, you would hold up your green card. That seems like a big deal. I'm holding up my green card. If you're not really sure what it means, or you haven't really formed an opinion about it, you would hold up your yellow card. And if you're like, well, I don't even know why that's on the list, I know what it means, but I don't think it belongs here, you would hold up a red card. Okay? And we're not going to discuss it right now, we're just going to capture where people are. So that's the purpose of the cards. I'm also checking to make sure that nap time isn't happening now, in case you missed that. Yes?
Who's
Jim?
capturing? Is somebody actually
Right there.
capturing? Okay.
Right there.
There's three pins. That's
Orange
yellow.
is the new yellow.
Okay, so factors for consideration on the list. The first is stable feeder patterns, which is described, and some of these are my shorthand, but you can see what's written there. As many students as possible move together from one grade grouping to the next. We're not going to do clarifying questions, but about the process.
So is this, I don't understand, or I think it's marginally important?
Yeah, it could be either of those, it could be both of those. If you're just neutral or not at a place where you have, if you're not red or green, you're yellow. And it's not a test. It's not a formative assessment. We're not gonna come back later and find out who changed their mind. It's just to give you something to do while I'm talking. Okay?
Good to know.
Okay.
But it also helps us understand where the group is.
So-
And what you need to talk more about later.
And it's this sense that schools go together to the next school level. And you don't have an elementary school going to more than 2 middle schools. We mostly all go together to 1. And you don't have middle schools or K-8s going off in more than 2 directions, where possibly you have them go off in 1. Okay, so that's brief description of stable feeder patterns. Hold up your cards and let Jim take a look. So he's got the greens. If you're green, you can put that down.
Greens,
If you're yellow, hold them up high.
4 or 5 yellows.
Okay.
Any
All right.
reds?
Okay. The next on the list is described as demographic diversity. So, and again, you have your own copy here, so if you want to make your own note, because you are going to have a chance to discuss this at your tables a little bit, feel free to do that. This notion that schools should reflect the broader diversity of the district, and that schools should have space to accommodate students with different learning needs. So that's that consider the learning needs of the students. Okay? Level of importance for boundary change. As a consideration for boundary change. You need a second to think about it. Okay, and if you're green, you can put them down. If you're yellow, keep them up.
6.
And nobody's on red for that?
We're not against it, we have questions.
Okay. All right, we're doing great. We are doing
Sarah,
great.
come on, we can start.
Next is the idea of compact assignment areas. okay? As tightly together as possible. The boundary is as tight as possible, not long and narrow and zeroing in. Because out of that, you get safer routes to schools, right? And you walk, right? You develop a sense of community. People actually know each other and see each other.
Right.
And you minimize your transportation times and needs. Okay. How do you feel about this one in terms of a value for boundary, for a boundary? We have a provocateur.
Tony
is
a red.
This is where the green comes in. Well,
Get out the
green.
pitchforks.
Well, great. If you're green, you can put your card down.
Yellows, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 6.
And if you're red, anybody red?
Tony.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. We're not judging today. Okay, the next category is optimal use of existing facilities. Let's see if Tony's red on this one. As a criteria for setting the boundary, under this one, the goal is to establish boundaries so that you have to you minimize the amount of facility changes that you have to make. You're able to conserve your natural resources. You guys all got the program now. You're like whipping those cards up. That's great. And you've got student enrollment that supports an adequate academic program.
Oh wait, wrong one. I was gonna say, what's up? They weren't in order anymore.
17.
Brilliant.
And yellows. 1, 2. Reds.
I see no reds. Looking at a boundary for one school, under this, you would also look at what the impact is on the surrounding schools. So that you would set boundaries so that you wouldn't have to make frequent changes or it wouldn't necessitate other changes in other places. And you would minimize instability at nearby schools and programs. What do you think about that as important boundary criteria? There's no advantage for being first. If you need a second, take a second. People have lots of blood in their hands.
So intriguing.
I'm so glad you're on this committee.
I'm gonna give you one of my extra reds.
Yellows.
Yeah, if you're green, you can put them down.
1, 2.
You get one vote, Max.
I had an extra red.
Toss it in early. Yeah.
You got an extra red?
I did.
No stuffing
Just
the
for
ballot
Max.
box. This is not Florida.
That's because we know you.
Hey, he's the student council's co-president.
Other reds? Other reds?
So we have one red on that one. Okay, all right. And then the final one that's listed in policy
Yeah, he's an elected
No, I
official.
don't.
I got a half over there.
is limiting student impact. So create the minimize impact on students by affecting the smallest number of students possible, avoiding moving students more than once. And I think the language is a little more specific in the actual
Can I look at the notes?
policy where it says, avoid causing students who have continued to reside in a particular geographic area to be affected by a boundary change more than once at a particular school level. So don't hit the same kids twice when they're at least at the same level. And avoid separating small numbers of students at the same school level. So if you were to split, for example, a K-8 between two high schools, you wouldn't want to send 15 kids off to a high school by themselves with no one else in their cohort, unless of course there were only 15 kids in that age group.
Yeah.
Okay, so importance of limiting student impact as a criteria for a boundary that you want to look at.
Greens.
Questions on this one, Sarah.
5.
One on every question.
Yellows. 11 and reds.
Anybody remember this?
As a soccer player, this is the card I don't like to see. 1.
Sarah's pulling
Any
it.
other reds?
I'm kind
Yeah, that
of,
means you're passionate, that's all that
is
means.
kind of
All right.
connected to like the
Okay.
second one, this one, and this one.
All right.
There's gonna be overlap.
Now I'm going to invite you for a few minutes. Jim, about how many minutes do you think we have for the turn and talk? And then report out. About 5 minutes, turn and talk?
Yeah.
And then 5 minutes to report out? Okay, and we're still on track, okay.
Yep.
2 questions for you to consider. What's missing from both the purpose statements that are listed there and the list of factors? So you've shared your input on what came up, on what's already written, what's already been said, but what's missing? And the second question, and I want you to be able to get to both questions, so I'm gonna ask you to be in small groups, like in 2s, so that each of you get a chance to talk, and that you actually hit both questions. So what's missing, and which of the factors is least important to you, and why? So you don't have to tell us what's most important right now, but if you were to leave one of the factors at the bottom, if you were to prioritize, of the 6, what would be number 6? So you've got about 5 minutes. Introduce yourself to your neighbor and have some discussion.
Shall we get together?
Advantage of it.
It's okay, I'm safe.
How's your dialogue?
So it's okay.
Good?
Yeah, I know, I went
Good.
with this.
I'll take
it all. I'll take it all.
Maybe they hit
We wanna
something
know
that
what
they
you
weren't
said.
going. We may have to shift half the boundaries.
We only have a few minutes that we've given to this for tonight, so we don't have a chance. We don't have enough time to hear what every conversation produced, but let's see if we can grab the high points. And the fact that you have your cards will be helpful. So, starting at this table back there, did anybody come up with anything that was missing? And for those of you that are listening, if you had something similar at your table, go ahead and raise that green card, okay? Anybody have anything missing? Go ahead, Matt.
So for diverse student body demographics, we had a couple of reds and a couple of greens, or maybe not, maybe just one green. But we kind of narrowed that down to sort of what does it look like on a neighborhood by neighborhood and school by school basis. So that was maybe something that was missing, where we're talking about the PPS population in the first point. And really, we should be talking about what is that catchment area, that neighborhood, and does that school reflect the diversity of that neighborhood?
So first is does it reflect the diversity of the neighborhood? And did that come up for anybody else? Okay, all right.
So if I say neighborhood by neighborhood.
I mean, we're just curious if it did.
Is that a good shorthand for that? Sure. Spelling and penmanship don't count.
Any others at this table?
Can I clarify, if we're gonna go back, what I heard you say is that it's representative of Portland, right?
No.
That's how it's written. Right? And so you're saying, is it representative of the neighborhood
Right.
and the school?
So I think generally the group said it would be pretty challenging to have a school, an individual school, regardless of where it's at in the district, to represent the Portland community population.
Thank you
and
for
diversity
clarifying.
population.
Yeah.
But really is, what does that neighborhood look like, and how do we reflect that diversity?
Okay, thank you.
So a quick, I always want to try and remember to make a pitch for the information that's available to you. If you haven't picked up a copy of last year's profile books, we have them for you, and this is all online. There is a table in here that describes the racial and economic diversity of every neighborhood school in PPS and what the population of the students attending that school are. And if I would say those are ways to operationalize, what you just said is that the attending population of the school should at least reflect the diversity in the underlying neighborhood around it, and not necessarily be a match or try and match the overall district demographic. And again, just making a pitch for where that information is available if you want to start taking a look at that. Okay, next table here.
One more thing.
Oh, another one.
What else is missing?
We're taking everyone's time.
What else is missing?
So it was sort of language around, and I don't know if this is included in sort of this overarching purpose, but really when I talk about the need for boundary review or enrollment and transfer adjustment, it really is about the health of a district and the ability of there to be parity and also equity across the district and resources and opportunity for students. So not a well, I don't know if that's reflected in that time. So if it's not, or if it is, and I might not be seeing it, but really it is about how does a district stay healthy and use the resources in a way that benefits the students the most.
Did that come up for any other group?
Sort
Oh,
of.
sort of, good, okay,
Yeah.
good to know, good to know. Okay, I'm gonna jump over to this table. Was anything missing? And it's okay if it wasn't, or if you don't wanna call it out now, we're just gonna spend a couple more minutes on this.
Sasha's kidding.
I'm looking at Margaret, who most eloquently articulated my thought.
Oh, Margaret, no pressure.
There's no pressure. I'm not sure which thought that was. Sasha has more than one usually, but, I think one of the things that, Lisa and I had said as far as the purpose statement was concerned, was whether or not, I mean, it doesn't feel like the equity policy is explicitly called out.
Okay.
Or it's not called out closely enough, and I guess that, and then kind of underneath that is, we were talking about it, it sounded a little bit like, this is, the policy is written not for a district review as a whole. It really feels like the policy that, as we're looking at, was looking at boundary by boundary by boundary. It's a very different process. So are we talking about using the boundaries you currently have and then adjusting, or are you talking about taking the off the map and putting new ones on?
Okay, that come up for anybody else?
In my head.
Was very eloquent. So I'm gonna see if there's just within these three groups, is there anything else missing that you wanna get out to us right now, verbally, before we, Michael, you got one?
Yeah, well, it was the opposite of diversity, and that was having critical mass. If you have a group of students that either are Russian language speakers or something else, you have a critical mass of those students at a single school such that you can provide the appropriate resource, rather than taking that community and splitting them down the middle, and you have just a few Russian speakers here and a few there and a few there, and then there's not a critical mass of resources.
The value of concentrating some populations for service.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Interesting,
Just
okay.
as a factor to consider, not saying that
Okay.
trumps anything else, but it's a factor to consider.
Okay, did that come up for anybody else?
Well, ours was kind of related to that, because where I didn't see was anticipating future growth and program expansion. So I'm thinking of, looking at local and immediate, I'm thinking of my immersion program. So is somebody thinking that this program is designed to expand to 5th or 8th grade when they start? That, I don't see that in here.
Okay.
As you're drawing.
Make room for future programs.
Right.
Okay, good, excellent. I'm gonna take one here and then one here, and then we gotta move on.
So the one thing, I don't know if this fits in this, but to me it just seemed like that this was solely looking at factors where PPS can directly control, so it's very insular. So I think for me the big question is, to Sarah's point on projecting for future growth, like how do you kind of take in outside factors that influence your ability to manage enrollment growth, like housing, is that an appropriate factor to put in policy that you do, and you include in your decision-making process? So I don't know if that's appropriate for policy, but it's a factor that you have to be predicting of.
External future.
Yeah.
Or other external factors that you're aware of. that you-
Right.
Okay, good to know.
And kind of along with that, we also talked about considering the location of other educational options. And we weren't sure where that fit in these factors. So focus schools, charter schools, and
Right.
other.
Yeah, so if
There are
there's,
other
schools.
types of schools.
if there's a focus school in your neighborhood boundary, it's likely that a bigger percentage of kids from your neighborhood would go to
Yep.
that focus
Yeah.
school, so you need to have a bigger
You need a bigger
overall
boundary.
boundary for the neighborhood school.
Otherwise, it's a diminished
Yeah.
program, yeah, okay.
Whoever's in
Any other things that you felt was missing from this year?
I don't know if it's
You're gonna get more in the
missing, or
next
it's
10
just
years
that I
if you keep
don't
going
quite
on.
understand it. I noticed that we use equity and equitably, and I'm not sure of the intent of, the statement. And so when I think about it, I think about inequity. It does not mean equal, but it does mean is that we are going to be able to educate all the children wherever they are, which doesn't mean that they're going to be treated equally or have equal access to the education. So I think maybe a little bit more definition in terms of what the intent is when we talk about equitable education.
Excellent. Anybody, did that come up for anybody else? Green card over there, thank you. Green card's up on that, nice. Okay, we are close to the end of time on this. Remember, this is not a topic that we're leaving for long. It will be woven through, and we will come back to it explicitly at various times. I would imagine that in late spring, it'll almost be like the midterm for this group, to come up with some statements about what you're looking for and what success is gonna feel like, so that we can match those up and get them endorsed. But I do want to ask the least important question, and we can do this really quickly. So I'm just gonna, let's just start with, did anybody have stable feeder pattern as their least important? No? Okay. How about demographic diversity?
Based on how it's currently written.
Right.
Okay. No, just put your card up or something so that we can see how many. Again, we're just quantifying. So a couple. That was least important for a couple. Okay. And what about compactness in the boundary? There's one there.
Are we doing this per person or per?
Per person.
No, per person. Per
Oh,
person.
person.
Mm-hmm. You as an individual. If you.
Oh, per person.
Mm-hmm. And how about the optimal use of facilities? We've got one here. Okay. What about stability for the surrounding schools? Least important for anybody? No? Interesting. And limiting impact. Yeah, I know, there were a lot of,
So hold up hands here.
There's my big card. I wasn't alone. You guys just did.
Everybody wants to be like you, Sarah.
The truth always comes out, Sarah.
No, she held up her red card for that. She was alone.
She felt all out in the cold.
Comment. In terms of why that came up for me, to me it's a different question when we set the new framework than it will be once we have a process in place.
Okay.
Once we have a process in place, I do want it to limit the impact on students.
I agree.
But to get to where we need to get, we may need to upset the apple cart.
Yeah.
Okay, so lots of green cards on that one, lots of agreement that would be, okay. It's a good point. We haven't spent time on your rationale behind this, and so I do want to come back to it. I'm not going to assume anybody's reasons for this, and this wasn't like voting any of them off the island. It was simply an opportunity to kind of frame what the success factors might be, and figure out where you are really quickly on it as we start. What comes next, I think? We're going to talk next about the work plan, which is a rough draft for you to take a look at tonight. And one of the things we're looking for is, do we have learning opportunities in place that will eliminate those aspects that you want to make sure we're looking at? And if we don't, we need to make sure that they're a part of what you're doing. This question of developing some success statements to capture the qualities that you believe are most important to achieve your boundary change as one of your work products, one of your early work products. And by early, I don't mean let's do that next month, because I really want you to have the time to learn and to get a little more exposed to what's happening in schools before you have to come out with anything like that. And then I think you're going to need to refine those statements, because we've got the next thing we're going to hear about tonight is the Values, Growth, and Equity Survey, community-wide input. Wow, are you going to be matched up with them, and how do we balance those things? And then get that level of endorsement from the superintendent and probably the school board, so that when you're out working on boundaries and redrawing lines, this street versus that street, and you're having to say, well, I decided this street because of these reasons, you know that those reasons have at least been endorsed by the ultimate decision makers. That's what I see as next for this. I thank you for your time, and we're a little late, so I'm not even going to talk anymore. Sit down.
Okay, shifting to our next agenda item, turning it over to Jason, and the draft work plan is in your packet. Jason?
So, Jim, I'm going to use the whiteboard. Is that okay? So if I can get those down. So one of the things that some of you who have not yet worked with me is I am probably one of the most OCD type A personalities you will ever meet, but I'm also the most diplomatic to your face. And one of the things I want to do, I've been thinking about for the last 3 months, is that we know that whatever decision, I think there are two tensions at play. One is whatever decision and rationale that we make impacts a lot of other processes. Or the flip side is, there are a lot of other processes that we have to take into consideration before we can do our work well. And so what I've been trying to mesh through in my head over the last, especially in the last month, especially over winter break, is how do we kind of keep aware of all of those things, and at the same time, the things that D-BRAC will play a role in, do we know what those are? When do we have to play a part in those roles, and do we have sufficient time in our current meeting schedule to do the necessary deep dives on what are those issues are? So from kind of the big scheduling perspective, that's kind of the big tensions, I think, system-wide that I've been trying to think about. So one of the things I always do in a meeting when people are talking about big things is I always do a doodle or a timeline just to see what it is I'm actually dealing with. So my intent was, if we're supposed to have new boundaries in place by what, fall 16? So I always go all the way back here to which is January of 2015. So basically, we're real about a year and 9 months. So to really just own that up front. So
Jason, can I ask you a question? So you say fall 16, then in order to be effective fall 16, and that's what
I'm gonna do, is, so my realization was, if the assumption is boundaries are in place for the school, so there are a couple things I always try to do in terms of backmapping. One was, we theoretically have like a year to get something in place for, that kicks off budgeting, staffing, et cetera.
So
All
they
of those
actually have
other
to be in
things.
place in January,
Right.
not in fall.
So again, assuming that this is what happens, this is our window where we have to do our work. So for me, the big thing was, so we know for the first kind of like 5 to 6 months, that's kind of what I call our mid-plan assessment, to do and to see where we are. And so I was trying to think of, what do we need to do to get onboarded, but at the same time, enough time for us to either seek community input, and also at the same time give the board sufficient time to do its process around. So for me, that's one tension. Budgeting, et cetera, so that's another, so for me, the big important thing was knowing that all the other system factors are in place is for us to really focus on what we have to do to be in a really strong position. So this is what we were kind of thinking about for kind of the first set of meetings, to what we were thinking about is really getting a system-wide analysis of A, where are we now? B, how did we get to where the system is currently? So, and then C is, what is the long-term projected growth for potentially the next 15 or so years? It's kind of a past, present, and a future approach. So what you'll see in the meetings is, for the first month is January 8th and tonight, and then the 22nd is knowing how some of the other processes that we could potentially influence that will allow us to hear from the community what's important to them. And that's something that John will talk about, as well as Wendy. January 22nd is kind of our first deep dive in terms of student enrollment and housing forecast. And so that was the first conversation that we would do as a committee, to really figure out what are the current demographics of the district, what are the projected enrollment figures for the next 10 to 15 years. So we would bring in folks from the PSU's Population Leadership Center, who is officially in our committee, which is great. And then also figuring out additional folks from the City of Planning, but then also folks from the Portland Housing Bureau, to really do an assessment of long-term, where is housing going to be for the next 10, 15 years? How certain can you plan for it? And at the same time, how does the district for the next 10 to 15 years really build an infrastructure for D-BRAC, the district, and the board to get regular feedback information, so that as it does its planning, both the system and the schools can get a real continuous loop of information to figure out how to do buildings every year, plan for what that new generation or new cohort of students is going to be. So really doing intentional deep dives of where we think, but also helping the district manage a growth scenario, because we haven't been in that for a couple of decades now. So I think what's important is this is new conditions for everybody, and so we're really trying to build a new knowledge base and a new framework for everybody to operate off of together. So then moving into our February meetings, so this is the next part. So February meetings on the 5th and the 19th is Tony and others from facilities to lead a conversation in terms of how does the district use the facilities in its portfolio, how do they work with facilities to really figure out how do they plan for enrollment growth and the different tools facilities has in its toolkit to manage changes in terms of enrollment growth and enrollment decline. So we can get a sense of, as we're doing boundary work and from now and the future, the tools that will be in the toolkit that we can help advise the district on as boundary review happens. So what you'll basically see, the theory is between this first set of meetings between now and May is a huge, deep understanding of everything that's available to us. And hopefully we'll begin to figure out what's missing and we can help the district build that together and so we can manage the growth and really keep every student family that lives in Portland, that they send their kid to Portland Public Schools. So on February 19th February 19th and March 5th are what we call 2 deep dives on programs to really figure out the different program offerings the district has, how the process through which they cite them, the potential programs that they'll develop and cite in the future. So doing that assessment of where the programs are, the ones that they want to continue to build in the future, and how do you build that framework for as programs grow and shift, how does boundaries play a role in that too? So it's, again, that framework piece, but it's also enrollment plus program. So then moving into March 19th is after the board will have voted on potentially the new changes to the enrollment and transfer system. Judy and staff will be able to give an overview portrait of what the new policies will potentially be, what they have been, and how those systems have played out in terms of enrollment at particular schools throughout the cluster, because while policies govern the system, they have different impacts throughout the entire system. So really getting a sense of what happens at the high level, but what the impact actually happens on the ground. So a different lever that actually impacts our work as well. So once we get through kind of the bigger system tools at play that we have that either we impact or impact our work, I think the next thing that we were brainstorming is how do all the tools that are currently in place impact every cluster? To see where we currently are and how we got here. So the really trick is to see from the policies and how they played out in terms of how programs have shifted over time, how boundaries have changed, how different enrollment and transfer policies have hit different clusters, how we plan for enrollment well and how have we not planned for enrollment well. But then hopefully what will happen is come by the end of May that everyone has just an overview sense of where we are and how we got here. The big question, I think, part of the thinking is how do we take all that information and knowing that we're in a growth phase, what do we need to build so that we ensure that we have the best healthy system possible, but at the same time doing our best possible job to mitigate any unintended consequences, knowing what has happened historically. So that's part of the intention of why we're suggesting that this first 4 months or so is a really intentional deep dive to ensure that in a growth period, which is what we're entering, that any bad consequence that has happened historically doesn't get passed on to future generations of families and kids. So that's why we're being very intentional, suggesting that we do that first. I think part of the tension that comes at play is a couple of things. One, to Pam's point, is the more we extend our work, our kind of deep dive system assessment and knowledge-based building, that will theoretically give us fewer months to really think about what different boundary scenarios are, our process to deliberate on them, and then whatever they hand off us to staff, and then ultimately the board, to figure out what work they need to do in a way that gets them on track to get things in place by January that kicks off budgeting, staffing, et cetera. So at the same time, it's important for us to think the longer we take potentially to do our deep dives, the fewer months that we give everyone else who has to make the ultimate decisions to really have their public process, because we know that this is gonna be a contentious process. So it is that ultimate balancing act. That's kind of, so I think one of the things that we wanted to set up for this conversation tonight is this framework right? Are there things that are missing? But at the same time, the more we add, that's less time for others. So I wanted to really get a sense of the membership. Are we in a good spot in terms for the next few months? Or what real trade-offs in terms of planning for the scheduling do we really need to make to do this right? So do Kim, Michael, Scott, Sarah, Michelle.
So,
Making it work.
And it may be in here. I don't think I'm necessarily adding something, but I want to make sure that it's going to be part of the conversation. Something that came up with our original conversation at PAT with Jim, and what occurred to me as I was going through here and making notes to myself, you know, are we going to be talking, where's the equity lens of target numbers fit into this plan? As far as, I see all the target numbers are based on program, K-5 versus K-8 versus, you know, all of that. And I get that from a facility standpoint, but in real life, we know that 30 kids at one school does not look like 30 kids at another school.
Right.
And just having a set number of students isn't necessarily what's best. I know, and that came up a lot in our PAT discussion of, we need to honor the fact that kids learn differently, kids of color learn differently, kids in poverty learn differently. And we need to make sure that we're not just saying, this is our system, and your school can hold 450 kids, and that's it.
Okay.
So I don't see it here, but I'm assuming it's embedded somewhere, and if not, it needs to be.
I would say it's embedded in here somewhere. I don't know where, but I know that's one of the conversations that come specifically on A, what those enrollment targets are, B, the rationale for why they're set the way that they are, and C, an evaluative, is that the healthy solution giving other decisions? So I feel like part of that question is going to get answered somewhere in there. So I think as we're planning to figure out how to sequence these, if this is still the right meeting sequence, that we make sure that those questions get answered.
And I would say, Kim, that if we get to the, when we're doing the program discussion, like
It'll come
if
up
by
there.
the end of that program discussion, you don't feel it's clear and people don't feel that it's clear, that different kids have different needs and those needs also affect how we use their buildings.
Right.
Like these targets are not concrete things that you must hold.
Right.
They are things that we should be deciding before we go into actual boundary review. Are these targets sharp enough or not? So.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and that ongoing, like Sarah and I were thinking, like, you know, for the future, is it realistic for this school to have that number?
Right.
And Jason and I have talked about how do we reach out to the professionals, the teachers that are at these schools that have a deep understanding of what the kids need. And so, you know, I've talked to the executive board at PAT about getting that information. And so
Right.
that's something that we can weave into this.
The other thing I wanted to quickly highlight is you brought up the whole point around grade configuration. So
That's
one
a
of the
major
things
concern.
that we talked about in our planning meeting is we acknowledge that there are a whole bunch of other decisions that, again, like I said earlier, impact our work or we impact that decision. So I think one of the things that I think staff is starting the process to figure out is lining up all of the other external PPS factors, and I think what we draft kind of understood was kind of those decisions might fall under one of three categories, I think. One is, in terms of D-BRAC's role, one is we are the recipient of whatever that decision is, so it's just like we get what, we're just getting information as an FYI only. D-BRAC may play some role in that, so it's, we're consulted, so we have to allocate some time in that decision process, or if it's C, which is what we would call the recommending body, which means we are the group that sends off a recommendation to Carol. I think depending on wherever any of those issues are, like that's I had heartburn right there when I heard that. So I think for me the big question is getting a sense of where all of these other issues fit into that portfolio. But I think what's also important for things that we either play a participant or recommending agent in that role, those are the things we should really focus on, because that means if we are in those two categories, we have to shift this schedule around. And so I would say until that gets assessed, we focus on what we feel we need to get ready, but knowing that these folks and other staff are really working hard to figure out how do you really connect the dots. So that's something staff have really taken heart to figure out how to do it well.
Okay, thanks.
So
Who's
Michael, Scott, Michelle.
So a few thoughts. One is, everything in here seems very Portland-centric, and there was some information early on, I think it was PSU research that was done prior to this, that looked at just other communities in the U.S. that had either changed their boundaries or come up with a new policy for boundary changes. And it seems to me that rather than trying, although we want to be very sensitive to, you know, we do things a little differently here in Portland, I think there's a lot to be gained by either having someone who's done that research come and give us an overview or give us a list of readings, but really look at what are the best practices and also the pitfalls that other communities have run into, and let's make sure we're pretty familiar with that as part of this upfront learning process. So that was one. The two other thoughts I had is, if you look at that midpoint there at June or whatever it is, till January when it's supposed to be ready to implement, there has to be some time in there where we've already got some proposals that we put out to the community, and you have, I don't know what it is, but I guess it's probably 2 months or something worth of back and forth and community meetings, and so that needs to be built into it. And then the other thought that I had, final, I always have three.
The trifecta.
That's right. The third one was, at some point it would be great to say, if these were our policies, not saying that they are today, and we laid out some boundaries, just do some kind of what ifs and see, can we determine how many students of color would be in each group, or gosh, we don't know if we drew the line on this street versus that street, we don't have that data, or can we determine some of these other things, and if we prioritize 1, 2, 3, and we had the best of intentions, and let's do a what if and say, oh my gosh, that wasn't what we intended. Right. So I think some kind of trying out some things, you need to have some modeling and say, if we set our priorities like this, let's try them and just see on a theoretical basis, did we achieve what we were trying to do in terms of size of school, in terms of equity, in terms of whatever our objectives were, or did these very well-intentioned set of guidelines end up with an unintended consequence?
Scott.
So I want to jump off on something that Michael said, and that was in the public testimony. Well, you've got a line in June, and there are dragons on the other side of this. I want to see what those are. I want to know who's actually drawing boundaries. I don't think it's us with Markey. Are we going to be doing it? Is there a technical GIS team doing it? That's been talked about. I want to know what that is, what exactly that is, how we interact with that, how we feed into the survey, which presumably interacts with that process. How long does that process take? What does its product look like that we can then evaluate? How long a time is that going to take? Are there going to, and like you said, are there going to be any substantive changes in, we know immersion is happening like this, and we've seen what happens when there isn't a facilities plan around that. Sarah gets stuck with it. And I say that with a smile on my face of that wasn't planned at all. It was like, we got this program, we got to stick it somewhere. That's not a plan, and that's why I say stuck with it. And it might be a good thing, but there's just a whole lot on here that says we don't have an educational vision in this district, and that just ripples through and makes our work about a zillion times harder.
And it may be that the agenda item around the Growth Values Equity Survey, the results of that should hopefully be useful for this group to help with some of these questions and thoughts. And we'll talk more about that.
Right, but that doesn't get us to what's the plan for programs for kids with special needs, because SACTA ran into that. It's kind of scattered willy-nilly all over. We get families who get moved all over. The programs sometimes get moved without warning.
One of her closing classrooms.
And there's like 4 or 5 other things like that where there's no plan that affect boundaries in a big way.
I expect this work plan will become a lot more specific and concrete and clear as we develop it, right? Sometimes, just like you're mentioning these things, that helps us to aim at targets for this group's work moving forward. This is our kind of first rough draft. Are we kind of on track? Does this make sense? Is this helping you see how to move forward?
No, because I gotta work backwards, as some folks said, to know that, gosh, do we need to compress this? I don't know, cause I don't know what the other
What's
steps are.
after June?
And we better, any plan better have some buffer for that after this going forward, cause stuff happens. And if we don't plan for a little extra time in there, so I gotta have that before I say yes to anything like this. I mean, the topics are fine, but the timeline, I don't know.
So Michelle and then Sarah, and then.
Okay,
Or-
so,
Sorry.
I'm going to assume we're meeting throughout the summer. Is that correct?
I'm gonna assume yes.
Okay, because that would be, you know, I think we need that time. But, you know, I don't know, has that been established already and I just glossed over the detail,
That
or
we'll
is
meet
that
in the
something?
summer? I don't think we officially vote on it, but it's an assumption.
Given the fact that, that one of the key inputs to your work is the Growth, Values, and Equity Survey, or Values, Growth, and Equity Survey, which you're gonna hear about in about 5 minutes, and the outcome of that isn't available until May at the earliest, then I think that means that you need to continue operating as a committee. We may take a few weeks as a hiatus, and I understand that that means that we may not have ideal attendance at every meeting. But I would say for at least in July, August, September, October are likely to me your most intensive and technical months, when we're also designing some opportunities for the community to be weighing in on what draft proposals are. Yes.
And then, the public comment period precedes January?
Oh, yeah.
I
Yes.
assume
Right?
so.
Yeah.
Because January is when we voted on,
And,
right?
Right.
And then, it is how long?
We don't know. I don't know.
Well, there are a certain number of mandated meeting, I mean, no, there's just one. I mean,
Well,
I read the
it's not
policy.
policy, so we don't have a,
Said you have to have at least
It's
one
one.
meeting.
At least one
Okay.
person.
well, and, you know, it's likely to be a lot more than that.
Well, it was
Right.
one meeting for the concerned people, but this is all the people, so what, you just have one big meeting? I mean, these are details that I think we might wanna think about when we're planning our, and that, the summer thing, and then the length of time we wanna budget for public input are the two big things for me right now. Summer is done, we decided that, so who, and then who, like Scott's question is, who's deciding these things? Who's drawing the boundaries? Like, these are, these process, we'll go
So
to
can I,
process.
so I wanted to point out that the second little point on the, is that at every meeting, time will be allotted for racial equity training, and practices and reports from subcommittees. And in addition to that, so every meeting isn't going to be you sit and learn. There will also be time to ramp up other procedural points that are gonna be critical for you to do your work, including what the technical platform is that this will be built on. You do have some technical experts in the room today who are working on that now, and they'll have a chance to share that with you. So that I mean, in our ideal heads, we're thinking about half the meeting is a deep dive into a subject matter, and about half of it on just building the platform to do your work and making sure that procedurally you've got what you need to be successful there, if that helps.
Sarah and then Alice.
Okay,
And we'll
I'll go
probably
quickly,
do-
because I think there's a theme here that we have to be done in January, because the budget processing starts, there can't be much input. So anyway, I think what I hear is the concern of not enough time. And I would look at the school briefings, perhaps that's too much. If we can embed the cluster information in the program overview and the enrollment and transfer process, because, Dan, I have to say, we have to have it done. I think we've made a commitment to the community, I know I have, telling them that we'll have this figured out by fall of 16, that's when we're starting. So I think we have to hold that firm, if at all possible, which I think then goes to the public comment of, we need some firmer dates and we need to have some timelines, that we have to have some decisions by this point. Because then we need, if we don't, we have to let the community know.
early on.
And I just wanna say, like, Sarah's comments, like, is the thing that I need to figure out, okay, move agenda things up here so it gives us, that's what's really helping me right now to figure out how do we move things around.
But this is an incomplete plan, and so
Right.
how can we comment on it?
Well,
I mean, I don't.
First, you can comment on what's missing, which you're
Yeah,
already
I mean,
doing.
it is,
But I mean, in
the
terms of-
risk is that we try and map out too much too far without understanding where you are as individuals and what sort of information and what order you need to be able to make decisions. So that's why we're putting out a straw man saying, you know, here's what we've thought of thus far, how do we make this better so that it serves the group? So, I mean, this isn't, the agenda was not decision on work plan, it was discussion on work plan, right? I think it'll be quite a while before the group is able to say, yes, that's our final work plan. And we're over time now, we wanna go Alice and Director Knowles, and then I think we need to move on to the next item.
Well, I kind of echo some of the comments, but I feel like we do need to know what's on the other side of that midpoint. But at the same time, I also appreciate like the real attention to like knowing where mistakes have been made before and not wanting to go down that path again. Because it's fine to come to a decision, and if we're gonna make the same mistakes again, I don't wanna go there. So I think if it means like we know the rest of the process, and then it means we need to figure out, we work harder in this amount of time, meet more, can't believe I said that, but I think that that's what we need to know.
Okay, so I just had a couple of things. One is the time thing, and I'm just playing off what Sarah said. So done in January doesn't mean this group is done in January, it means the board is done in January.
Right.
So back that up 2 months.
Exactly.
2 months. And your public comment, if you're having public comment, then.
The board has to have
before
public.
that. So, so the public comment thing is a big thing about whether, I mean, this public comment we have at the beginning of each meeting is great, but I'm sure there's gonna be a lot more.
Yes.
But the question I had even more about was, the actual charge. So I'm hearing stuff about, are we drawing the lines, are we, you know, all that kind of stuff, and I'm not clear. I thought we were looking at policies and drafting the policies, and then I didn't think we were drawing the actual lines on the boundaries by January. I didn't think that was this role, but if it is, then you gotta back it up a lot more than that, so. And I would agree also on the school briefings, that I don't think we need that much. We have done some boundary changes, but not very many in the last 20 years.
So I know there are other hands, and that will
Oh, yeah.
relate to a question I'll ask the group in the next steps about whether you want longer meetings. So you can think about that a little bit. What we want to do now is shift to our next agenda item, and again, this is a content piece, and I'd like Wendy to start to make her way up here. And she'll be talking about the growth, values, and equity civic engagement process. And at the end of that, we'll ask for 2 or 3 volunteers to help develop that. So, do you want to sit down, or do you
No,
want to stand?
I'll
or do
stand,
you
that's
want
fine,
me
so
to-
I just like, if I'm standing, I can see everybody.
Yeah, do you want me to hand out anything?
No.
Okay.
No.
Jim, can I ask a process
Yeah,
question?
Sasha.
So Director Knowles just kind of put a fairly fundamental question on the table.
And I don't know the answer.
And that's fine, I'm not saying, I'm not answering the question again. I'm asking, so the question is out on the table, and we move on to the next agenda item, which is fine, but the question I have is, what is there are certain things that need to be addressed to move forward, and so do we come back and what's the process by which we address those?
So I think from my head, this falls under the category of kind of the work plan for the committee. And we've got some very good feedback about what group members need, changes to this draft. And I could certainly see at the next meeting or one of the first meetings in February, going through and saying, okay, here's draft, well, this is like draft 5, but you know, draft 6 for you. Does that help get you where you need to go? So So I think that topic will be embedded in there.
So to my mind, that question got to our charge, which is different than our work plan.
So, and on the agenda, the chart, oh, go ahead.
So if I could, I think it was really helpful to have that conversation and for all of your feedback to come in, and the group that talks together, which is Jason and John and Hector and Tim and me, will take it all back. And in addition to the details, like you want a lot more details within the work plan, you want the time frame to go all the way through board adoption. And that seems like a pretty firm date, so we're mapping from there. You want more details around that. And scope and charge needs to be, well aligned with all of those things. So places that there's questions needs to be raised. So, and I think that needs to come to you for the next meeting. I don't think it can linger out there because it'll help you get grounded in what you're doing.
Could I suggest that you might pick a couple other committee members to meet with you, with Jason, so that he's not carrying the whole load himself and you'll get more input that way?
Oh, I kinda like it that he has to carry it.
I'm just trying to be nice.
I'm not, yeah, I have a lot of time in the next 2 weeks, sorry.
Well, and he is a solo co-chair at this time, so if there is anyone who's interested in working on developing this topic, if you would let Jason know so that he can pull you in, and there's Director Knowles raising her hand.
So let's turn it over to Jason and Wendy.
John.
Or John. Sorry.
Yeah, we look alike.
Carrying the load.
They do. So I'm interested in having a conversation.
Thank you. Hi, I'm Wendy Willis. For those of you I haven't met, I'm Wendy Willis. I'm the Director of Civic Engagement for the National Policy Consensus Center at Portland State. We're going to do a really quick summary of what this values, growth, and equity survey is that we started talking about earlier this evening, and then we can answer your questions and solicit your participation in that. So, as many of you know, last year the Center for Public Service and the National Policy Consensus Center was asked to do an assessment on district-wide boundary review, particularly how the public can play a role in that. And we talked to over 200 individuals last year. And the major theme that came out of that was boundaries are interrelated with everything else. And it's sort of the conversation that started to happen here. Interrelated with facilities, interrelated with grade configuration, interrelated with program offerings, and deeply interrelated with the racial educational equity policy. So given that interrelationship, we found just in conversation with people, you couldn't have a conversation about one without having the conversation about everything else. So the recommendation we made to Superintendent Smith and the board was embrace that those intertwined elements and actually do a survey that covers values that would affect all of those things. So do a large survey that explains that the district's in a growth phase, to make sure everyone's on the same page with that, that talks a little bit of, that sets the stage for the racial educational equity policy for the full public, and then get values back from the public to inform not just the work of this group, but the work of the groups within the district that are working on each of those other pieces, so that there's a sort of values basis that's shared across all across these decision-making platforms. So you will get that back, operationalize it for boundary review, develop a decision-making framework that Director Knowles just mentioned, and then apply it is sort of the vision. And then while you're doing that, the folks that are working on academic programs will take it and do a similar process. And Tony will take it and say, okay, what is the public? What do we know about the public about for facilities? And so at least it creates both a shared vision and a shared vocabulary. The timeline for that, because I know we're really everyone's timeline anxiety is spinning at a high rate of speed right now, and the timeline for that will be it'll go to the public in right after spring break, and John will talk about what's about to happen between now and spring break. It'll be in the field for about a month or 6 weeks maybe, but not to worry that by the end of May we can have a report done. The data aggregates very fast. Within 2 to 3 weeks after the survey closes, we can have data back to you and a report back to you to start using for your work. So by the time school's done, there'll be a complete report. I think John should talk a little bit about what's happening between now and then, and how those things are stacked before we take questions.
Well, and can I have one other thing
Yeah.
you recommended? So the other piece of the recommendation was that Wendy and her team laid out a whole community engagement protocol for the district that they recommended, that we're beginning to implement, and I'm gonna explain in a second. And they also recommended that we set very ambitious goals for the percentage of the community who will participate in these surveys. And we've embraced the ambition. We didn't say, oh gosh, we're not gonna do it. But what they recommended is that we set a goal of having 40% of the PPS community participate in the survey. And that we have a goal of 50% of the community to come from historically underrepresented groups, particularly families and communities of color in those surveys. And that then inform how we're deploying our community engagement staff resources, our financial resources to drive that level of engagement. Okay, so that was also in their recommendation. We've embraced that. The community involvement, public affairs office, my team, we were sort of given a challenge because at the same time we got this recommendation from the Center for Public Service, we also, the board of directors also set in their work plan for the year for us to design and implement a district-wide school climate survey. Okay, so a school climate, the survey that Wendy just described is going to be a question about the big picture of PPS, big district-wide values, things that will drive district-wide decisions. A school climate survey gives parents, students, staff, and parents in each school the opportunity to give detailed feedback about your experience, your individual experience at your individual school from the perspective you have as a student, as a staff member, or as a parent or guardian. Okay, and so we had to look at the calendar again for the year and say, okay, how are we going to do both of these things? And I think what we settled on is a strategy that's going to allow one to build on the other. So we actually decided to partner with the Center for Public Service not only on the Values, Growth, and Equity survey that you will all get for you to drive the work you're going to do, but to also do the school climate survey. So in 2 weeks, we are going to go live with the PPS Successful Schools Survey, which is why I passed it out so everyone can see that. If you're a parent, you'll be receiving a postcard at home this week reminding you, telling you about the survey. Every single household in the whole district, all the materials we produced are translated into our 6 languages. The survey will be available online through Oregon's Kitchen Table, which is the center's survey tool. In all of our languages, it will be available. You can take it online in all of our languages. You can download a PDF of the survey online and take it in paper and pass it out in all 6 languages. You'll also be able to go into a school and find paper copies and take it in all 6 languages and turn it in. We're going to have staff deployed in schools, and we're going to be really focusing early on in our schools that we know have high percentage of historically underserved families to drive participation among those groups because we want to get to that 50% target. But we're going to have this survey open first. We're going to have about 14 staff people here working on this for 6 weeks to encourage parents and families to participate. So this will be open January 20th through the end of February. We're going to be done. We're going to have a little celebration. We got 40% of our community to take the survey. And then we're going to shut down for a few weeks, and then we will go back live and launch the Values, Growth, and Equity survey on the big district-wide questions. The success of one is tied to the other. Here's why, and this is why this is exciting. So first of all, what Oregon's Kitchen Table allows us to do is it allows us to track participation by school, by all of the demographic questions we're asking in the survey. So we're literally going to be able to look every single day and say, how is Atkinson Elementary, like what percentage of families have taken the survey, the Successful School Survey from Atkinson Elementary? Okay, today it's 15%. And we're also going to be able to look and say, how does that break down by different demographics? Are all those responses from Latino parents? Is the Latino community there just get into it and take it? Or are we getting a representative sample of that school, be able to compare responses to what we know about the demographics of the school? And so we'll be able to deploy our resources to drive work, implement strategies to drive engagement in schools where we know right now we're not doing so well, or we're out of balance. Or maybe we know we've gotten lots of responses from the Cleveland cluster, but right now we're not you know, we're just not seeing the engagement we want from the Franklin cluster, so we need to get active in those schools. That's what's cool about it. The other thing is, every parent that we successfully get to create an account with Oregon's Kitchen Table to take this survey, when we launch the second survey, the district-wide one, they're gonna get an email saying, hey, straight to their account, log into your account and take the survey. So we're gonna be building familiarity. It's gonna allow us to get participation in the second survey without having to do the really nitty-gritty grassroots organizing we're gonna be doing in the next 2 months for this. So,
And which will allow us to get deeper with the historically underrepresented communities in the second survey, because hopefully the folks who are already primed to participate will participate quickly, and the community organizing efforts then, the second survey will really be deployed, focusing on communities that need some extra support to participate.
so if you're in a school, just real quick, if you're in a school in the next 6 weeks, you're likely to see at least 1 or 2 days a little mobile table of laptops with staff there, where we're gonna be giving parents in the school the opportunity to take the survey. If you're at a community meeting or at a cultural center in the community, you're likely in the next 6 weeks gonna have somebody, a community agent, one of our organizers in there saying, hey, here's what the survey is, with laptops or tablets ready to take it with families. We're gonna be at community events. We've created a huge calendar of every community event where we think parents will be for the next 6 weeks. I mean, that's the effort we're going. We expect at the end of February, where we've got a few schools where we're down to it, where we're just not getting the level of participation we want, we're prepared to go door to door. So we've got some resources set aside to hire a team to go door to door if we need to. So that's the level that's what we're gonna do to try to get to that 40%, 50%. Okay.
John's gonna mention.
So, just that, I'm a visualizer, and just seeing 3 dates up there doesn't help me that much, but trying to put this survey, the successful school survey, is gonna give us as a committee values from the community that they see that need to be included in this framework that we need to build to successfully implement boundary changes. And we're not gonna get that until May, June.
May.
And not this survey, this is the plan survey, it's the value growth.
But they'll come out at the same time.
Yeah, they'll come out.
Yeah.
So, and can you talk a little bit about how this can help develop the plan? So the growth phase.
Yeah, right. As you can imagine, developing the instrument is part of the challenge to make sure that it's a successful process. So we'd like to ask for volunteers, 2 to 3 volunteers from this group, from this committee, to join volunteers from other areas of the district to help develop the content together. And we then our staff and DHM Research, nonpartisan public opinion research group, we work together to validate the survey and get it prepared to go up.
And what's the timeline for the survey development?
Now, it starts, today is day 1.
Okay, and goes through
It'll be,
March?
it can go up until it goes live in March.
Okay.
We would like to not have it today.
So if you volunteer, that means you would be doing additional work outside of this committee time to help go in deep on getting the survey developed. But I wanna make it clear that components of the survey and that information, this committee will stay informed about that, and we will have time for you to learn about what's going on and additional opportunity for people who aren't on the subcommittee to say, wait, I think maybe you should think about doing this. So I just, if you don't volunteer for the subcommittee, it doesn't mean you will not be involved at all with survey development. If you volunteer for the subcommittee, it means you'll have that opportunity to learn a lot, but that you'll be bringing what you learn and understand back to this bigger group.
So questions from Kim, Max, Hector, and Michael.
I have 2 questions. One, the first is, what I heard you say was that this successful school survey is you're asking for feedback from parents, staff, and kids.
Students in 5th, 7th, and 10th grade.
From particular schools, right?
Correct.
So, how does that work? I know, hold on. Let me,
sorry.
I'm talking about each individual school. So, if I'm a teacher at Scott, so I'm staff at Scott, but I'm a parent at Vernon. So do I get to set up two different accounts? Because
Yeah,
they're
you'll-
totally different
yes,
perspectives.
you'll be able to take the survey twice. You'll be able to take it, because, so here's the
I'm
thing.
okay with that.
So thank you so much for asking the question. The parent and guardian one is the only one where you have to set up an account. As a staff member, you're gonna get a PBS survey form in your school, you know, in your box for you to take. whenever you
And
wanna get
just
done.
on the-
They're actually different surveys too. We ask different questions, they line up, but because you have different experiences and things we want feedback on, they're different.
My next
So
question.
you'll be able to take one as a parent and one as a staff.
Okay, my next question is, this survey's already done, right? And
Yeah,
so when you're talking about.
It's in translation.
The parent and guardian
Yeah.
one is staff, we're still working with our unions to get it done. Since you're wearing both hats.
That's interesting, because that's come up, are we really involved?
Yes,
Because
the
we
staff
haven't
survey.
felt like we've been involved.
Yes, the
So,
staff survey.
okay, that's it, right? Am I?
Yeah, no, I think it's, I can't remember what Gwen said.
I can't either, that's a little foggy to
The
me.
parent and guardian survey is done, it's currently being
Okay.
translated. and looked.
My question is who, I get that you're getting input for the values one from a lot of different groups, this group, other groups. Who came up with the questions for this one? Because your climate surveys in the past, I just gotta be honest with you, they've been horrible.
So in our board report, Tuesday night, we reported that we adapted, so we consulted with the National School Climate Center and looked at the instruments that they recommend large urban school districts use. We also looked at surveys that were successful in driving improvement in the three priorities of the district right now: improving early literacy, reducing exclusionary discipline, and improving student health, and increasing graduation rates. And our team recommended that we adapt the California Healthy Kids Survey, which is a statewide California climate survey that they administer. So we started with that as our baseline instrument, and then we've gone through an adaptation process, working with the board school climate committee. We distributed the parent guardian survey to a number of parent advocacy organizations and gave 3 weeks for feedback. We met with 3 of those groups one-on-one and went through multiple edits. We made almost all of them. The only ones we didn't take were those that our survey team thought started to get and compromise the research integrity of the survey, I guess is the way to put it. And so we went through heavily edits. I would say it's about 60% of the original survey at this point, and it's very much uniquely a PBS successful school survey. So
we've
that
got about-
process is exactly what we are in the middle of for this staff survey.
Okay.
So we put it out to all of our staff unions, to PAPSA, who represents the principals, said we'll meet with you individually, let's go through it. And we've taken literally 95% of the feedback we got. We made changes from the board meeting Tuesday night, and we've been very open about it.
So
Okay?
we've got about
Thank
2 minutes
you.
left for this agenda item and several questions. Max?
So you said it is geared towards students.
There's a student version of this.
There's a student version. Okay, 'cause I heard you say it. What you said that first, and then when you went through again, you didn't say it. You didn't say it. So the student version is ready to go out in February, along with this one, the successful schools
For
one.
that, for this survey.
Yeah.
And the value script, the equity survey is one survey that
For everybody.
students,
Okay.
community members, families, staff, all take.
And we will ask people to designate
Who
which
they are.
category they
Yeah.
are
Okay.
when they're taking it, but it's one survey.
That's right.
Okay, but you said 5th, 7th, and 10th graders
For
just
one,
this
for that
for this
slide.
one. Okay.
So
All right,
we've got like 1 minute left. Hector,
So I
and then
just,
Mike.
I don't know
I
why
just
all-
want to
why
kind
all
of
parents can
highlight,
take it, but not all students can.
and I wish Johnny had more time to talk about the intentionality and the consciousness of reaching out to underserved, traditionally underserved populations, which I think is, and it gets to Maxine's point earlier, which speaks to the work that this group is gonna have to do. How are we going to be different? How are we going to address the specific needs of the communities that we're reaching out to? And again, I just think that your intentionality about it will be helpful for us as we're doing our work.
Can I make one comment about it? I know we're running short of time. This is one of the powers of working with Oregon's Kitchen Table. So we're always trying, in our community involvement, we are always, just like everything else we're doing, we're working to build racial equity into that. We have struggled with a way to measure it through a community involvement and know that we're accountable for doing it. We're gonna be able to track on a daily basis by race. How are we doing? I mean, the numbers are gonna show us. Are we getting, we have 30% of the district has responded overall, but is that, is 80% of that just from white families, or are we getting responses from communities of color? And so this is gonna be, for me, an accountability moment where we will know, based on the responses, how we're doing with racial equity and the outreach, and we're required to adapt new strategies in order to drive equity in the responses, because we're gonna have the data telling us what's happening.
Hector, I think the other part of your question is what data you have available to you when you're doing your work. And you'll be able to disaggregate all the data based on demographic factors that you find relevant. So you can separate that data and look at it through the racial equity lens as you're working doing the work.
Right, which gets to my point about, so Kim raised earlier, the whole question of equity also. And there is not going to be an equity event training. My vision is that we will utilize all of our racial equity tools each step along the way.
As it should.
There's not gonna be an event about it, we're gonna use it.
Mike?
So the question I have is, we're looking at people who are already in PPS. Are we making any effort to look at families of preschool children to see what are their impressions of PPS and whether they'll choose us or something else? And then also families that have opted out, that have said PPS is not up to my level of whatever reason, and I'm gonna go send my kids to private school, I'm gonna go to Beaverton, I'm gonna go somewhere else. Are we doing anything to reach out to those groups?
That's a great question, because that's where the organizing strategy differs between these two surveys. The first one is a climate survey, right? So it's just for PPS families. The values, growth, and equity can be taken by anybody who has a zip code inside the PPS boundaries, or has a child who has a zip code outside the PPS boundaries but has a child inside the PPS boundaries. So that organizing strategy is a much broader one.
And there will be some way to figure out of those who has preschoolers and who has opted out.
Yeah.
Great.
You can ask a question, then aggregate or disaggregate based on the answer.
Super, thank you.
Okay, so I'll break my promise and go to Alice, quickly.
I just wondered, you had mentioned that the survey was being translated, and you had mentioned a strategy. I just want to be clear, because our community is pretty diverse. Some have email accounts, some have access to email, some don't read, frankly. And so what is going to be the strategy for reaching the communities that, aren't able to take those jobs?
I mean, that's some of the things that John was mentioning about being, especially this one, being on the grounds of schools, going door to door to necessary. I mean, and one strategy that we've used before with paper surveys, because we'll have paper surveys and everything, is if the family feels comfortable, is doing it orally and writing down the answers. I mean, there's always the question about whether that people feel that compromises their privacy, but if they feel comfortable with that, we're more than willing to use that as a strategy.
So we're over time on this agenda item. We need two or three hands up of people that want to volunteer for about the next 5 or 6, 8 weeks to help develop this growth, values, and equity civic engagement.
Well, if they're on it, I think we're good.
Volunteers. So Nisha, Scott, Michelle. Nisha, Scott, Michelle. Did I get that right? Excellent. So, moving to the next agenda item, next steps. We're a couple minutes late, but I still think we're likely to get out on time. So, one of our main action items is to continue to work on this draft work plan. Obviously, we got a lot of good feedback tonight. We'll start to help fill in those gaps as we talked about. And Nisha, Scott, and Michelle have volunteered to help develop the Growth, Values, and Equity civic engagement tool. And one of the other things, and let's pull out your cards here. I mentioned a few minutes ago I was going to make this suggestion, so now it's going to happen.
Why do we only have a red one now?
As a facilitator, I have observed this group has a lot to say about a lot of topics, and there's a lot of interest in doing a lot of work. So, my suggestion, subject to the will of the group, is that we add 30 minutes to our meetings.
To the end.
Green cards agree, red cards disagree, yellow cards either way. Pardon me?
At the beginning? I think it would have to be at the end, Pam. Asking people to get here by 5:30.
Can I clarify something?
Well, I mean, that could be a
So
question.
Let's debate it.
The suggestion I'm making is from 6 to 8:30, adding 30 minutes at the end. Green agree, red no, yellow in the
I
middle.
have a clarifying question.
Clarifying question.
Is this in addition to is this the?
We'll have 30 minutes, we'll have 30 minutes to summer.
Our standard regular meetings would run from 6 to 8:30 instead of from 6 to 8.
Oh, okay. I was thinking we were making it to 9 now. Just curious.
No,
Okay.
no. For our standard regular
Please no.
meetings.
If you want to meet till 9, Kim.
Just
8:30.
curious.
Standard regular meetings from 6 to 8:30. Green
Who can do it?
support, red.
Is there anybody who could
yellow.
not make that work?
So I'm seeing 3 reds.
Sasha's embracing his childhood and he wants to go to bed.
What if it were 5:30 to 8 p.m.?
Does that change anything?
Okay.
Could people be green on 5:30 to 8 p.m.?
I can't see what you got, Michelle. There we go.
Okay, so we have a couple people that couldn't make that work, and they're different people. So is the time frame, it's the time frame. So 5:45 to 8:15?
How about
Well,
that?
that's perfect.
5:45 to
I'm serious!
5:45 to 8:15.
Could you make it work?
I
Try it at the
see.
next meeting.
Okay.
Wow, this is like our
Can I say
schedule.
something?
No, we are out of time
I'm
here. We
hearing
still have to have
comments from the
everything else
public,
from
and
everybody
we
else.
might
So
need to
we're
be
at
flexible on public
5:45 to
input.
8:15. Regular meeting times, 5:45 to 8:15.
You may have suggestions for how we can use our time better during the meetings. This is an open invitation to call or email Jason, me, Jim, and share those things. I've heard a couple snippets
He's
as
up
we've
at all
had
hours
this
of the night. Give
discussion.
him a call.
I want to make sure that we pay good attention to that. But there may be ways that
call
we
him
can
at
make
around
sure that we are
5 or 6 on
maximizing our
January
use of time
10th.
in the meeting so that your 2.5 hours are absolutely worth it. Beginning at 5:45. And while I'm talking, your next meeting, there will be a learning topic, as described here in the work plan on student enrollment and housing forecast, correct? Nobody had any, significant concerns about that topic being first?
I got something.
I have, is transportation routes part of that, or no?
That's a good question. Where's transportation?
Is transportation,
It'll be
bus routes, et
We're
cetera,
losing
part
the
of
group.
that?
Hold on a minute. We've got 2 more minutes. Stay entrenched.
I'm gonna ask that become part of what we do in the second one where we're talking about facilities. I mean, because I don't know that that's a whole hour. I don't know, so we'll make sure that transportation gets covered.
So what was very helpful at the end of the last meeting
I'm
was.
sorry about that, that was a mistake.
Was to go around
Tony's name
and.
was not supposed to be on there. Sorry.
So it was very helpful at the end of the last meeting to go around and say 2 words about what you're thinking or feeling right now. Okay? So 2 words, what you're thinking or feeling, starting with Sasha.
Nap time. I'm sorry, I was trying to be eloquent for you again.
50%.
All right, we'll come back to Sasha. Michelle.
No, that was it. 50%.
That was it.
Oh, 50%. All right.
Getting better.
Mike.
A lot. Consider.
I'm gonna take part of his words. We get to a lot to consider for the 2, so we got it.
Jason.
A lot to consider.
I don't want to say what I really want to say because there's a camera right there.
I know. Say it.
Just do it, it's okay.
Well, my first 2 words were going to be happy hour.
Yeah, that's good.
There we go.
Okay.
Yeah.
Michael.
Process or boundaries?
Matt.
Oh, skipped. More student input, that's 3, I don't care.
Misha.
I was gonna say drinks with Jason.
I'm in.
Sarah.
I'm making progress.
Kim.
Frustrated and cheers.
Hopefully forward.
Hector.
Charge clarity.
Tony.
High anxiety.
About time.
Pam.
I'm with charge clarity over here.
Maxine.
No comment.
Alice.
Study and research.
Sheila.
Need help.
Judy.
Vacation tomorrow.
Oh!
Towards Palm Springs.
All right, turning it over to Jason for our last comment and adjournment.
Well, wrote it on my other agenda. Give me a second. So, our fourth meeting, first meeting of the new year. I know we've got a big road ahead of us, but I will say what I've been thinking for the last 3 or 4 meetings, which is I'm glad that this is the group I get to work with to solve this impossible problem. So I look forward to the work ahead. The other thing I want to say is, as a coach of the Constitution team at Lincoln, I did not know that Max Tuttle was on the Madison team until he said hello to me on Tuesday night. So, go Max. And that, thank you very much, everyone. We are adjourned.
Good night, thank you.
I take it we're gonna leave these.
Yes.